Okay, welcome everyone to the first discussion of R4 and the Plex proposal. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jackie Scanlon. I'm the Development Services Manager for the Planning and Transportation Department at the City of Bloomington. I will be going over a presentation tonight for you about the topic we're going to discuss, and then we will switch it to trying to answer questions that you have. So as you're thinking about them, feel free to send them either to Keegan or to Ryan Roebling. They will go through the questions as they're coming in and read them aloud, and then we will get answers for those. Myself and Senior Planner Eric Grulich, and then Keegan and Ryan as well. Just a couple of housekeeping things, because we will have probably a sizable group. We are doing no video, no audio to keep it simple, so you can not be distracted, and so I won't be distracted. So we will, for those of you who have been going to council recently, that's what they have adopted, and we are taking that on for these meetings as well. So if you turn your camera on and we turn it off, no, don't be offended. We are just leaving them all off for the sake of simplicity. So as I said, I will give a briefish presentation, and then we will go into questions or comments. So we will, a couple things, we will answer as many questions as we can here for you. We will, if we can't get an answer for you, all the questions are tabulated in the comment section, and we will be putting up answers to all of the questions we've been getting in these various meetings on the website shortly, hopefully. Yes, so if you have a question that we don't get to, please know that we will get that up on the website. We will consolidate them into topics probably, and then put as much information as we can. So speaking of the website, I'm going to show that briefly for those of you who haven't been there yet. And then there was a small change made today as well. Just a moment. Okay, so this website is where we're currently taking input from the public. So also something to mention is that we are not actually in the public hearing portion of the process yet. So this is kind of like a precursor to the more regulated, stringent process that will go forward starting in Plan Commission, hopefully in January, and then on to Common Council after that for the map and text amendments. So this webpage has information about the story maps that we are showing in these presentations are located here, as well as interactive map and a static PDF map that you can use to find information about your property. All of the Zoom presentations are posted as well, and we are working on the responses to the consolidated questions. And again, tonight's questions will go up as well. And then we have had various feedback forms, and we'll likely post another feedback form next week related to this topic and the topic that was covered Tuesday. And then the Zoom link meeting, the Zoom meeting links are here also. We've also today added on the right side the most frequently asked questions we've been getting about the process. So feel free to check that out as well. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to dive right in. So tonight we are talking about the proposed R4 zoning district and the Plex amendment text, because most of the feedback we've been getting about one or the other are related. So we're presenting them together and hopefully addressing questions for both tonight. So as a refresher, the R4 zoning district was created when we did the text amendment update, and that was done, that was finished and adopted in April of this year. And that district was added in order to address a few things. So allowing for a smaller scale district to be used located near amenities and as a kind of a buffer district, maybe between lower density residential and commercial areas. It was also included in order that some existing lots that we have now that don't meet minimum lot size and to bring them into compliance with that, which has an effect sometimes on their development, such as setbacks that were intended for larger lots or uses such as ADUs. So as I kind of went over briefly, the R4 district is intended to accommodate residential uses on small urban scale lots to offer a diverse mix of housing to be consistent with the comprehensive plan as well as other adopted plans. We anticipated that these properties would typically have access to many public services and including be more accessible for pedestrian cyclists maybe than other areas of town. And again, as I mentioned, a transition between small lot residential and development and urban scale residential. So we are going to go over tonight. We talked about a little bit about this at a previous meeting, but we are going to go over how, in a little bit more detail, how the R4 areas were determined. So we'll get to that just shortly. So this is going to be our example here. So proposed R4 areas were chosen, as we've said before, using the lot size as the base for existing lots in the city. Then we identified clusters of those existing parcels with those compatible minimum lot size included in the lot to create the district. So I'm going to go over exactly how that was done. And this is just a description again, which you have seen if you've looked at some of the other story maps describing what I'm about to go through in detail. So we just used a real world example located here in Elm Heights. So the first step that was taken was determining where, when we were determining where newly created R4 lots should be located, was that we used R3 and R2 parcels that were currently substandard that did not meet the minimum lot size for R3 and selected those parcels. And then those were identified as potential R4 or as R4 sized parcels based on the minimum lot sizes of the districts that were in the text that had been approved. So as I mentioned before, substandard lots often struggle to meet current development standards for the zoning districts that they're in. And then that generates situations where they are required to get a variance for development or expansion that would otherwise be typical if they matched their minimum lot size. If their minimum lot size was more in line with the actual size of the lots. So after those lots were identified, you can see here, we created a 50-foot kind of donut around each lot or section of lots. We call that a buffer, so radius around those lots. And then that was chosen because 50 feet is the lot width for R3. So if you had more than one R3 size lot between two R4 size lots, then they wouldn't connect. So we created the donuts or buffers and then looked for areas where those connected and started to form clusters. So you can see that's what the blue is here, the round areas around the parcels. And then the third step was when we actually went and found clusters of those donutted buffer sections, and those included any that overlapped. And so we called those potential clusters. And you can see those here. They're clusters of the buffered areas, and they have at least two, but often many more R4 size parcels in them. So then we removed R4 size parcels that were not within those areas, that did not stay. If there was an R4 size parcel that was not captured by these two buffering processes, then those were removed for a potential analysis, because then they lacked kind of a grouping of same character as other R4s that had R4 in the area may have had. And we use the buffers to select all of the existing parcels that intersect with those clusters. And so you can see those here in purple. And then we use those to create our proposed R4. Let's see. You can see here what we've done, and it's described again in the text, is that we took the purple lots that were identified and extended the areas out to nearest right-of-way. We also then took into account the intent of R4, which discusses R4 districts being immediately adjacent to amenities such as parks or buffers between less than single family and other more commercial or industrial or institutional uses. So, moving those boundaries for R4 slightly out based on that as well. So we said in another meeting that we would go through an example, and we wanted to do that as well, so that you could see how it was done. And something we've said a few times, but I think is maybe getting a little bit lost, is that this is just a draft. So we consciously made a choice not to then make subjective decisions about how to adjust these lines. So one we've heard a lot of discussion about is this area here east of Woodlawn between University and First. We've gotten calls from people inside of that area wondering why there are R4 and the properties across the street aren't. We've gotten calls from people across the street who wonder why they're not R4. These are the kinds of things that we are hoping to have identified and discussed with the public, and we wanted to just bring forward the data that was done a little bit more systematically before those subjective-ish decisions start being made. So again, you can see that area in context, and the other areas that were created around town of R4 are the same. We're done in the exact same way. Okay, so now I'm going to discuss the Plex changes. Just a moment. So the first question we're getting a lot, of course, makes sense, is why are you reintroducing the Plex discussion? So with this zoning code, something that we're looking to do is to increase housing stock, right? In general, just plain old stock, getting more because we need it, and also to increase housing options. So one way to do that is to zone for housing in areas that we know will imminently redevelop on a large scale. So 2nd Street Old Hospital, we're doing that in the Sudbury PUD area further southwest in town. We're doing that there as well. But another more complicated way is to try to figure out a way to allow sensitive addition of housing stock in existing developed areas. So we have a little bit of that in the code now with the ADUs that were actually put in the code before the most recent update to the zoning code. And we have cottage development is another one that can be used in some areas of town that can supply smaller scale housing, but still has a number of development requirements for those lots. We wanted to discuss a little bit why we think it's important that we revisit this and try to find a way to add sensitive additions in some of these areas. So when you think of development, these areas already have supportive infrastructure. Many of them have great access to transit, which we are always trying to bolster. The more riders that our transit can get, the more beneficial it can be to the community as a whole. And also, of course, many of these areas are close to existing amenities or employment, such as parks or downtown or IU. These are places where it benefits, whoever lives there benefits greatly from living there. And we would like to include as an option for development that some slightly more dense than than most recently in history has been typical, uses be allowed to go back into those areas.
Jackie, it's also important to point out that there were problems with the language that was written into the code when it was updated. And so
yes,
we need to fix those inconsistencies that we encountered with administering that. So that was an important element for also why we are revisiting this topic, because there are some problems that we need to fix.
Yes, thank you for pointing that out. Yeah, so in the code, the way that it was amended by council when the table was changed, permitted and conditional markings were removed, but asterisks remained, and we have been advised by legal, because we have tried to use it numerous times since April, and it's not usable, and probably also not defendable. So we need to clean that up, and we're going to have to bring that back no matter what. We also would like to point out, as I said a little bit, we are looking for in the whole code to find ways to encourage more housing stock and more housing options for people in the community. Plexes aren't the only thing that are going to do that. ADUs aren't the only thing that are going to do that. We offer development bonuses for inclusion of workforce and affordable housing, and that will contribute to that portion of maybe a lower income need. We also have proposed, as kind of the other side of the coin of the plexes, is the MS zoning district. We see those as going hand in hand, where it's easier to develop what people would traditionally see as student housing. So all scales of student housing, smaller projects as well that have more bedrooms per unit, as well as large projects. To develop in Bloomington has been pretty complicated for a number of years with our different waiver systems that we've had in the past. And this code really makes that development more predictable. And we think that that's positive to add more units away from existing neighborhoods that focus on the student population, and places for them to be located that make sense for why they're here. So, close to town, but as well very close to campus. And we think that can help take off some of the pressure that we hear about for the neighborhoods and student rentals as well. So we are looking to find a sensitive approach for the reintroduction, because we know they're already there, of plexes in our existing community, not only in large swath areas that need to be redeveloped. Just for those who don't know the process very well, we also wanted to clarify that this process of the zoning map and the text amendments that will start as a public hearing process in January is the same as any zoning map or text amendment that has gone forward previously. Right now, we're just in an information gathering process. We did bring up the Plex discussion for some of the reasons that I have mentioned. We are trying to see this as us putting out a set of ideas and a map and taking feedback on those, so that we can that can help us craft a draft of the zoning map and text amendment proposal that will go to Plan Commission in January, and obviously eventually on to council. So this process, if you haven't been involved in one before, is the same as it has been in the past. So we think that's important to note, because there has been a lot of discussion about whether or not taking input on text amendment in this way that has already been discussed recently is democratic. And yes, it is. We want to get as much input as possible. And we, again, would like to find a way, which we kind of didn't end up having time for last time, to work more closely with the neighborhoods and the elected and appointed officials to find a way to be able to sensitively add that option. So I'll just go ahead and briefly discuss a couple more things we've heard, and then get back to scrolling through this presentation. There has been some concern related to property value. We've heard two things. That one is, won't the addition of plexes increase my property value and taxes beyond the threshold that I would be able to bear. So we, yes, we hear that concern. That makes sense. We understand logically that that would be a concern for people who have existing equity in their homes and living in these neighborhoods. We have looked at property values and how they're increasing, spot checking properties throughout the neighborhoods, rentals, and homeowner properties. And those values are already increasing. They are increasing exponentially over time, some of them a lot. And it's because what you've all have said, rental companies are often able to purchase for sale properties at inflated prices. That forces the assessor to revalue your neighborhoods, and in some cases, increasing your tax burden beyond what it would likely be if you were all owner occupied. That is entirely true, but that is already happening. What we are hoping that this proposal could help do is to help find a way to lower the percentage of parcels in your neighborhoods that are rentals. We do want to encourage home ownership. And if we can't figure out a regulatory way to help do that, then the exponential increase of your property values as those properties turn over and are purchased by entities that can afford more isn't going to stop. Adding the option for Plexes in combination with the MS zoning district, we think can help lower that percentage, right? So creating more units that are available to renters can free up units that are renting now to be homeowner occupied. A second kind of other side of the coin we've heard about this is a lot of people have concern that allowing Plexes in their area will decrease their property value. Our plan, what we would like to do, and again, are looking for input on ideas about how this might work, is that we would like to allow Plexes on a slow, monitored basis. So making, the wholesale decrease of a neighborhood, the property values in a neighborhood very unlikely. When we did when ADUs were approved by council the first time, we reported to them yearly. And that was helpful for them to see. We would report how many had been petitioned. Did we receive any remonstrance? Where were they located? What types of situations were they being built in? And in that way, then the elected officials were able to, if it had been something that was not meeting our goals and their goals, then we could have stepped in and changed the process. And that is what we would anticipate happening here. That we would monitor greatly and monitor closely. And we said this last time, but just for everyone if you don't know, all building permit applications come through our department. They come through my group. So the 4 people here tonight, we see all of them. I see every single one, and the 3 planners issue them. We monitoring them and keeping track of how many there are, where they're located, who is building them. These are all things that we can easily do. And we can have a set standard for what we're looking for things that we're afraid are shifting from what our goals were initially that I had discussed previously, what those goals were and how we intended to meet them.
So Jackie, real quick, yeah. I just want to also point out, a lot of these concerns were raised with the accessory dwelling units when those were approved. And in that first year, we only did maybe 2 or 3 approvals for those accessory dwelling units, and very few of those actually ended up being constructed due to a lot of costs that were realized after the fact. So, I just wanted to point out that a lot of these concerns were with the ADUs, but didn't really come to the realization that a lot of people were fearful of.
Yes, thank you. So we have. So we were able to report to council what was happening. I think we maybe had 6 that were in the pipeline of approvals the first time we reported to them. And then through the next zoning update, we changed the regulations slightly, and we have had more. And so we will, when we go back to Plan Commission, we will report on those totals that are up to date at that time. I would say less than 20, I believe, 15 to 20 off the top of my head.
I'd say probably only maybe 8 have actually been
Yes.
constructed, although, you know,
Right.
maybe 15, 20 or so got approval. Like
Correct.
I said, once people started getting the actual cost analysis, only a handful have actually been put up on the ground.
Right. So I think that that is a fair, thank you, a thing to point out, that a lot of the worries that have been expressed about Plexes were also expressed about ADUs, and we haven't seen any of those bear out. And it's been more than 3 years, I believe. But again, we still do track those. And if that were to change, or if it seemed like the regulations we put in place that people were skirting them somehow, we could change that. And that is what we would propose to do with the Plexes. I guess my last point of things that we have heard before I go back to the presentation is some people have said they don't think we have a need for more housing. So we would like to direct everyone, and we'll put a link up on the website to the housing study that was done recently. And we do need housing. We have a very low vacancy rate, and incredibly low. So lower than the threshold of when you should be concerned about how much housing you have. And as the years compound and we don't address that, it's only getting worse. So, you know, sometimes we hear people say, oh, you only need to add 500 units a year, and you're letting, you know, someone build a 1,000 bedroom student housing project. And that is true, but we are at a, we would benefit from more units and more different kinds of units, and not have them all be in large student housing developments, because in the community, we don't only have students who are looking for housing. Okay, so the changes that are being proposed, if you've looked at the first story map, this is the same information. We are proposing to add duplex dwellings, triplex dwellings, and fourplex dwellings as either permitted or conditional in the primarily residential zoning districts. So you can use this little slide tool, and you can see here, this is the existing R1 did not yet exist. It exists on paper, but it wasn't mapped when this table was done. And you can see those asterisks, those 4 asterisks in the middle that don't have C's or P's. That is the problem that we have to address per legal. So we do have to bring this forward either way, whether or not we make them permitted and conditional in these areas. And this is the proposal that we are putting forward for discussion. So it would be that duplexes are permitted in the in all of the primarily residential districts, that triplexes are conditional in everything but R4, and that fourplexes are, in R2 and R3, they're conditional, and then permitted in R4, and that fourplexes would be conditional in R3 and permitted in R4. The one listed at the bottom that you see, dwelling multifamily conditional, that is already in the code. That's in R4, and there is a restriction on number of units. I believe it's 8. So for those of you who don't spend your time looking at zoning code, P means permitted, so it's allowed in that zoning district. A C is conditional use, which means you have to get a conditional use permit, which requires a conditional use approval from the Board of Zoning Appeals or hearing officer. And then the asterisk indicates that there are use-specific standards for those uses in the districts in which the asterisk appears. For example, here's a duplex we have in town. If this duplex were to be new in any of the 4, we are proposing that in any of the 4 main zoning districts, residential zoning districts, that the use-specific standards would indicate that the new duplex would have to be similar in general shape, size, and design, with those items listed below number 2 here at the center of your screen. So roof pitch, front porch width and depth, front building setback, and vehicle parking access. And then no duplex could contain more than 6 total bedrooms. Those things have carried over from what has already been approved. And we are open to suggestions. This is what we're looking for. Does this seem like enough? Does this seem like duplexes could be built sensitively in your neighborhoods and still be viable? Same conditions for triplexes and fourplexes, and they're just in the different areas, as I mentioned before. So I've talked about this a little bit. You know, we are trying to make desirable home locations more accessible to a wider swath of people in Bloomington. We think that goes towards goals of equity and sustainability. One way that we're looking to kind of chip away at that housing issue is through using Plexes. So there's some comprehensive plan guidance here that encourages, of course, smart growth, providing equitable housing access, you know, being realistic about our population growth, and that we need to increase our opportunities for housing, and that we should be doing that for across the board. Obviously, development in new areas, though it can be done, though it could be focused on affordable housing, of course, when a new area has to put in all of the infrastructure, do all of the clearing, you know, for example, in the Sudbury PUD, there's only those properties can only be so affordable without incentives from the government because of all of the work that goes into putting those in. Whereas in existing neighborhoods, a lot of that infrastructure, as I mentioned earlier, is already there. So again, duplexes allowed across the board in the residential, primarily residential zoning districts. You can use these maps. If you haven't come to one of these are up, will be up on the website. You can use these maps to explore these. You can zoom in and you can type in your address. You can turn the historic districts on and off. So we have duplexes. And as we've stated before, and, you know, has been said many times at these meetings and the ones that we had last year, they already exist. We have them in Bloomington, in some of these older historic neighborhoods, and we would like to be able to let that use expand there and in other parts of town, because we think it can be done sensitively and are looking to find out what those parameters should be. Triplexes, a little bit more restricted because of adding the conditional as opposed to permitted in some areas. And again, we have those in town already. And fourplexes, again, restricted again. So there's been some question about why the R4, for example, that why as you go up the chain of the districts, are more things permitted as opposed to being conditional or not allowed. So the answer is tied into what I said about the infrastructure and amenities that already exist in those areas. So those are the areas that the most people should live. Just if you were, you know, building a new city, we would like to, we as a community have said in the past that we would like to discourage sprawl, of course, and the way to do that is you have to allow development in town. And, you know, it's all relative, and, you know, if building downtown is obviously closer to amenities and existing infrastructure than possibly building on the edge of town or in the county. And so we're trying to find the balance of where those lines should be drawn about where these plexes should be permitted. And again, we have some in town and they are successful. So another big question we heard, and then I'll wrap up here, is will the properties and my property or properties in my neighborhood be protected from demolition? So we kind of wanted to break it down a little bit to explain how demolition works in town. So as I mentioned before, all building permit applications come through planning and transportation, and we route them to a planner to issue the necessary planning permit to go back to the Monroe County Building Department, who issues all building permits for the county. When those come in, we look to see is your property in a local historic district. So that is the same for demolition permits. If your property is in a local historic district, then you have to get approval from the Bloomington Historic Preservation Commission in order to demolish. So in a lot of cases, that is also true for it. It is true for additions and changes to houses, just at varying scales. Each district is different. But for demolition across the board, if you're trying to take down a structure in a historic district, the Bloomington Historic Preservation Commission has to approve that. So we have a lot of local historic districts. And you can see here, it's a little bit harder to see on this map, but when you, let's see if I can, hold on. When you zoom into some of the areas we've heard concern about, like here on the west side of town, they're almost entirely in local historic districts. So the Bloomington Historic Preservation Commission has a lot of, has purview and say about what can be taken down in those areas because of their regulations. Hold on, let's see. The other option, the second option, if you if you apply for a demo permit in a historic district, you have to get approval from the Bloomington Historic Preservation Commission. If they issue approval, then the Planning and Transportation Department issues you a certificate of zoning compliance, and the building department will issue you a demolition permit. Second option, if you are not in the historic neighborhoods, for example, in these R4 areas near Bryant Park, you may be listed on the historic sites and structure survey for the city of Bloomington. That was recently updated in 2018. Those properties are subject to demolition delay. So in demolition delay, the Bloomington Historic Preservation Commission gets to weigh in on the historic value of the property. And if they believe that it is warranted, they can recommend designation, historic designation, to the Common Council. And let's see. And we have many properties in town that have been identified in that way as well. So it's slightly less restrictive, because if they don't feel that your property on its own has historic value, then they will not recommend to council that it be designated. But they do have that extra layer of review in case your property were to have value to be designated on its own, or in case then they wanted to look in your area to if there were people in your neighborhood who were interested in designation, then that is kind of, I would say, a bit of a guide for them to see, using that survey as a guide to see what might be appropriate in that area. And then the third choice is that if you aren't protected by either of those historic preservation, either the guidelines or the survey, then a building can be demolished without any additional review beyond the need for the certificate of zoning compliance that we issue to the building department, and then they can issue a demolition permit. So it's really just one of three options related to demolition. Okay, so I think we're wrapping up here. We want to focus on plexes as an option, right? So not a mandate, and we want it to be, we would like to have it included as an available option for people who would like to utilize it for various different reasons. We have also heard, that people are worried about more renters. Well, plexes don't preclude ownership. They could be, each side could be owned separately. We will have some data, we're still culling through it, related to existing plexes in town and how many of those are owner occupied or how many are rentals on both sides. That is something that we see in town and could be a model moving forward. We think that the inclusion of the plexes does have a positive influence toward goals that are well stated in the community in general and in the comprehensive plan related to sustainability, providing more opportunity across racial and socioeconomic lines for diversity by building on, but also sensitively protecting the neighborhoods that we have now that are beloved, but making them available possibly to a wider swath of people who otherwise currently can't afford it because of our inflated prices and our shortage of housing. So that is what we're trying to keep in mind moving forward, and trying to encourage and ask members of the community to think about ways that they think that could be done. So that's what we're asking you.
So Jackie, I also want to just, point out there's a misconception that all rentals are student housing. There are lots of working professionals, other people that need housing that can't afford to buy or don't have that financial, and renting is a very viable option. So not all housing that is rental is going to be student occupied.
Right. Yes, that's true. So we have heard from some people that they don't, that they're not focusing on students, and that it isn't about students, but we, in the comments that we have gotten through the website and at these meetings, a lot of other people are concerned about students. So we do want, that is a great point to point out, that all rentals in this town aren't students, and are obviously available to young professionals as well. Okay, so if you have questions, please, again, I said this at the beginning, some of you maybe weren't here or were here but didn't understand. Please send them to Keegan or Ryan Roebling. So when you start a chat, you can choose who you are communicating with. And we will try to answer those here and or put answers up on the website after tonight. So do either of you have anything? Yeah. Keegan, you have something?
Yes, I have a few questions from Peter. If you mind if I just ask a couple questions in a row. Sure. So the first question was, why are the small lot neighborhoods targeted for the largest plexes?
Okay, so I explained this a little bit, but I'm happy to explain it again because I know it's very complicated and I maybe didn't do a great job. The R4 is the district that was identified in the UDO text as the one that was intended for most urban and most diverse housing options. And that it is also the smallest district. So those areas near town are the ones that can offer the most benefit if we can add density in those areas. So because of that, they are the smaller lots, and those are the ones that have the most intense use. We would say, I think that something that kind of gets lost, or I'm not sure, is that the development standards for building a single family house on any lot in town aren't different than the development standards for building a plex. So a house of the size that is allowed by code for one family or one person could be built in any of these areas to the same size that a house with, four separate one beds or whatever could fit on the lot could also be built. So that is why the R4 has the most intense. But I just wanted to note that the development standards that limit development on those lots do apply to plexes, which will limit what can be built there just by virtue of the size allowed.
Awesome. He also asked, and I think this is kind of related to what you just explained, but he asked to explain more about the algorithm that we selected the R4 districts with. What was the intent and what was the strategy? Sure.
So when R4 came through in the code, we felt that we needed it for one of the reasons that we mentioned briefly as something that we see a lot if you are in the historic neighborhoods, especially on the west side, doing typical expansion or development of those lots can be hard because the R3 district, which is really more designed for properties further to the east, size-wise is also applied there. And so variances are very common for things that you would normally not think that you would need a variance for, right? So, adding a small addition off your kitchen or, a back porch patio type thing. And so we wanted to have a smaller district that would bring those properties, make continued development of those properties easier. And also, so we knew that was in the code. Sorry. So we knew that was in the code, and we do think that it's useful. There were other ways we could have done it. We could have changed the minimum lot size for R3 and left it all the same, or changed the development standards and uses for that and left the district. That's something that is still possible. But instead, we went the route of adding a district. We're working with our consultant last time, and then when it came time to map it, we had to decide how we were going to do that. So we used, as I discussed, we did use identifying the small lots first and building out, but we tried to look at each of those nodes and clusters that were created and compare them to the intent of the R4 district to see if those seemed reasonable. We, as I said, also did not make a lot of kind of editorial or changes to those lines during this process, because we wanted to be able to come to the public and explain that they had been created through the buffering process, and that before it goes to Plan Commission, it certainly will change, and that it may change, to make the lines more regular or to move more toward the intent, but that where we are now was done through the analysis process, and we know that it will change, but we just we're looking for comment on kind of iteration that we put forward.
Okay, a couple more quick ones and then we can move on to someone else. But the next questions were, how do you plan to protect homeownership when investors start buying core houses out from under potential first-time homeowners? And they also asked why McDowell Gardens was not rezoned to R4.
Sure.
Oh.
Who muted me? I think we talked about this in another meeting for Mr. Dorfman, but McDowell was not selected because of the reasoning that we gave, the analysis that we just went through for how R4 was selected. They didn't have lots that met that requirement. So that's the reason. That's part of why I'm saying we didn't make we didn't make calls outside of the analysis at this point. And so they weren't included. Will you read the first one again? Sorry, Keegan.
Yeah.
I should have taken them out of order.
Oh, no worries. How do you plan to protect homeownership when investors start buying core houses out from under potential first-time homeowners?
Sure. So I would say a couple things. That's not going to start. That's already happening. So investors are already buying houses in town. Some people are fortunate enough to be able to, first-time home buyers are fortunate enough to be able to buy homes in town, but most are not in the historic neighborhoods, which I think is what he's referring to. So that's already an ongoing process. So as I described, what we would like to do is put forth a Plex proposal, Plex addition into the code that makes sense scale-wise, on a small scale as far as being compatible with the neighborhoods. And we would like to monitor that very closely over the course of months and probably years to see if that fear is founded, then we would change it. It's code, and it can be changed. We change them often. Again, as Mr. Grulich pointed out, this similar concerns were raised in the ADU process, that we wouldn't keep track of who was building them, and that that local landlords would buy properties and, you know, sneakily build ADUs, and they would be all over town basically. And that has not happened. But we do look out for them, and we were monitoring them very closely at the beginning to make sure that a lot of the concerns that were raised did not occur, and that's what we would try to do here. So yes, we would have to try it, and you know, we could take legislation forward in a matter of months or less probably, but we don't. We think that the regulations can be written in such a way that they can be less desirable for larger developers, and we are working on that. And that is the kind of input that we are hoping to kind of solicit, or we've gotten some good idea, some really helpful thoughts about concerns about neighborhoods and what types of what specific things neighbors are concerned about and how we need to address those. And obviously one of them is losing housing stock. So yes, we are looking at that in the update that will go to Plan Commission, and trying to build that in as much as possible, and then also monitor. Do you have any more, Keegan?
I do, but did Ryan have any questions?
Ryan, do you have any?
Yes, I do. I have several that came in from one viewer or participant in the Zoom call. They're not all worded as questions, so I'm going to try to word any that I can in questions, and then ask ones that are in questions that way. So, but some of these may be better answered just on the website anyway. I'll just say that because they're a little bit more detailed than we could probably get into. So, so the first is when and how often, or explain what conditional use means.
Sure. So conditional use means that the community has decided that the use is appropriate for that area, but that it needs extra scrutiny than permitted use normally would. So it has to be shown that through the conditional use standards, which you can customize for the use, it has to be shown that it can be done within those parameters in the location where the conditional use is required. And that has to be shown to the Board of Zoning Appeals. They have to agree with you and allow you to do that there. For example, you know, if you have a some sort of business use that maybe has like a typical, for some reason you have a lot of extra traffic, and you want to locate in an area where that's atypical, your zoning code may allow that if it's as a conditional use. So you have to then go and show how you're going to, how your use isn't going to cause the issues that sometimes that use does cause, and that you meet the requirements of the zoning code, some specific to your use, that don't change the character of the area, even though it's possible that the type of use you're requesting sometimes does. Eric, do you have additional thoughts on that, or Ryan? Okay, Ryan, you can go ahead.
There's a follow-up to that question, which is when and how often does the Board of Zoning Appeals deny a conditional use?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, let's see. We had when we had a number of medical assisted facilities over near the old hospital site. That is probably the last time conditional uses have really been a little bit more controversial. Typically, if you are going to apply for a conditional use and the code has specific conditions for your use, when you work with staff, we're going to tell you whether or not you meet those. And if you don't, we'll tell you, we're going to recommend denial. It's very unlikely you'll get this conditional use request, and then people don't file them. I think that's kind of a misleading thing about variances and conditional uses that has been said, it's just said off in different contexts, but that, you know, variances are never denied and conditional uses are never denied. If you meet the requirements, you're not denied, but by the time you get to the point where you are requesting from the Board of Zoning Appeals, you have already been vetted by staff. And if those conditions are written in such a way that they meet the community goals and protect the existing areas from the potential harm of those uses, then you should be able to go in. The community has said that under certain conditions you can go in. So if you meet those conditions, then you can go in. So usually once it gets to that point at the Board of Zoning Appeals, then they do approve them.
So Jackie, one thing I want to add with that, and this is also again coming from the experience with the accessory dwelling units, is we told the neighborhood associations that we would be taking all the ADU requests to neighborhood association meetings that they had. So when we would go to those neighborhood association meetings and the prospective homeowner was there, they would hear concerns from adjacent neighbors. If there were things that they could do to address those concerns, add landscaping, move something, those conversations were very beneficial and resulted in a lot of those concerns being vetted and resolved ahead of time, and resulted in, a conditional use process where we recommended approval and overall people were in favor of it because those conversations and interactions had already happened before it even got to the hearing.
Yes, thank you. I think that's a great point. Do you have more, Ryan?
Yeah, well, I have a bunch. So I was
okay, let's do a couple, and then because we have ones from other people too.
So the next is about height, and I'll expand that to the entire building envelope, and then also parking.
Okay, what's the question? Sorry.
Sorry. So the question is height limitations, etc.
Oh, okay.
Regarding the building envelope.
So in the R4, the currently proposed, well, it's already in the code. The height maximum is 40 feet. And the height maximum in the R3, which is similarly developed, is 35. In both districts, so in the R4, no matter what you build, single family or Plex, the maximum height is 40 feet. So anything can be built within the 40 feet. So then Ryan brings up what we call the building envelope, which is basically the area on the lot that can be developed once you're meeting height requirements, setback requirements on all four sides, open space, or what we call impervious surface coverage requirements. Once those four things are met, then depending on the size of your lot, you're left with a core area that can contain building form. So your house or your garage, and your house and or garage. And those restrictions and that envelope that's created currently is the same whether you're building single family or one of the plexes. Did that answer it, Ryan?
There was a second smaller part about parking. That's fine. You got that part.
Oh, do you know the parking answer? I just don't. I can't think off the top of my head. Sorry. Okay, hold on. There are prescribed parking requirements on the lot for plexes. I'm sorry, I can't think of the number off the top of my head, but we'll put that on the website.
Oh, sorry, I didn't realize you were asking me. It's half a parking. I should have.
No, that's okay.
It's half a parking space per unit, per dwelling unit. Okay.
So yeah, so there is some parking on the lot required, and then I got a question as well asking, isn't on-street parking available for these uses? It is in areas where I'm not as familiar, but in areas where there are neighborhood zones, we would have to look into, and we can look into what's the threshold where you can no longer, what's the threshold of number of units where you can no longer get a neighborhood zone, in which case you would obviously, if you wanted parking, need it to be on site.
So for the on-street parking, they can only count the spaces directly in front of their lot. So, if it's a 40-foot lot, for instance, they can only count 2 parking spaces that would apply to their parking requirement.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I didn't realize they could have. Okay, that's fine. Yeah, we will post parking information. We will post parking information that is existing. It's not new. We're not proposing any changes with that currently. So that is just in the UDO that you can find obviously on our website if you want to go there, but we will link that to the update page. I'm just going to go ahead and ask. I have someone here who couldn't figure out who's only messaging me, a couple people, but let's see. Can you define affordable? Is there a target amount of monthly rent, mortgage, payment, utilities equaling affordability? So great question. I think for this particular proposal, I think affordability is usually looked at more as a percentage of involving the area median income and percentage of that income and how much you're spending. For this particular proposal, we are just using it in a more broad term of toward the goal of creating more units so that all units or units in some areas that the price would go down. So no, we do not have, we are not currently discussing a target monthly rent amount for the plexes. Oh, thanks, Kevin. Sorry, some people were only able to send to me. So I just wanted to see if there are actually some questions in here or not. Oh, parking. Okay, good. Keegan, you have another one?
Yeah, I have 2 questions from Kevin Atkins. The first question is, how do ADUs compare with plexes?
Okay, so ADUs have size restrictions. They are required on lots of owner occupancy, and they also cannot be sold. So I think those are the big difference. They also, I believe, they have design including size restrictions. They have design restrictions including size, where that's particular to the unit. Where in this current proposal for plexes, plexes do not. They also can only be built on a lot where the owner of the lot lives on the lot. So either in the main house or in the ADU. That is not required currently in the proposal for duplexes. And I'm sorry, I'm blanking. I said a third thing. But they are pretty heavy. They're restricted in that their size maximum. There's a size maximum, a maximum number of people who can live there. The family limitation would be similar to duplexes, but the option for ownership of the second unit is non-existent in an ADU, where in duplex that is possible. So that's the third big difference.
I'll add one more thing.
Yes, please.
You can have a detached ADU. Duplex or all plexes have to be under the same roof. Oh,
perfect. Yes, thank you.
The second question, I'm not sure if we can address. It's more about the rental vacancy rates, but the question is the rental vacancy rate real, or is it a byproduct of false over-reporting by large apartment complexes which have received tax abatements based on occupancy versus older non-rebated units which would pay higher taxes if they have high occupancy?
Well, the professionals that we hired to do this study, who do them all over for the housing study, did indicate that they think they're real. I think it's a fair question. I mean, I think it's a fair question in that there's a lot of concern in town about whether or not what sort of impacts the large apartment complex houses have and how much influence they have. So I think if you look at the study, they actually post two vacancy rates. One that was slightly larger, and then one that was determined after more interviews with the existing developments in town. They were both very low. So I do think it's a real issue. I think just from more of like a layman's side, with the amount that it costs to rent in this town and how long it takes how long in advance you have to find something, and where those are available, I think it's clear that we do have a housing issue. And whether or not we can guarantee the vacancy rates, of course we can't.
And just one thing to clarify, Kevin says that the question about ADUs was more related to Eric's comment about how ADUs and duplexes, that ADUs wouldn't create as big of a disruption, and like our duplexes going to be similar. Do we think that that's similar? I think is.
Oh, okay. So I'll try and then let us know if I missed the mark. We think that while we understand the concern, obviously this is people's livelihoods, this is your equity, this is where you've lived for decades or not, you know, shorter amounts of time, or is a place that we all love. We understand the concern. We think that adding Plexes as a sensitive option is not going to flip the switch on Plex development like some people have feared. So yet we do think that it will mirror the ADUs and that the fears will not be founded. Yeah, that's what we think based on, we have seen Plexes included in single family areas in other communities, and they have rolled out very softly. We have heard comments from some local developers who have discussed, you know, that the costs really often don't add up. So we think that Plexes will end up being available to the people who we have kind of identified as needing them most, which is people who can, who aren't students and can have, you know, a family development or small scale owner occupied renting the other side setups. So I don't know if that answered the question, but hopefully.
Thanks.
Patrick asked, can 2 or more lots be combined to create a larger building site? Yes, the code allows for yes, the code allows for that. It also, just to make it, just to be clear, allows for that now for single family houses. But yes, 2 lots, you can build over a lot line in Bloomington. Sorry, I'm trying to read here. Okay, Brian, do you have any, or Keegan?
Yeah, so there is a question about, you mentioned that the code could be changed later. So what type of data would you be monitoring? How often do you plan on looking at it? Would this data be shared with the public? And yeah, could there be a mandatory review or a reevaluation should this approval go through?
Sure. Yes. Yes, there could be a mandatory review. So, you know, I think the administration tries to try new things in a pilot format, trying to create legislation that could create opportunities, and this is just across the board, but that maybe it does need to be revisited, and so is not, you know, necessarily intended for long-term without update. So yes, what we, you know, for example, one thing that we could do is, yes, it could be baked in that, you know, we have to come back to council in 6 months or quarterly or yearly and give a report on some of the things I mentioned. You know, how much inquiry are we even getting for Plexes? How many applications are we getting? For those that are conditional, how many people are we starting that process with? How many are finishing it? Or is anybody actually pulling permits for that? What are the characteristics of people who are using them? Because it has been, you know, we are trying to increase number of units, but we are reflecting back that we understand that the community is concerned that it will be only student housing developers. You know, for us, a success looks like a slow inclusion of Plexes into existing neighborhood areas across town, so that small increase in densities can happen in areas that already have supportive uses around them. So yeah, that's something that we would work out, of course, with the appointed and elected officials, of course, of how often would they want to see something and what types of things would they want to see. But those things that I mentioned would be, I think, the idea, the start of an idea of what types of things we would be tracking to make sure that the allowance of them is working toward the goals that we set and not putting the community at risk. Anybody?
I have a couple questions.
Okay.
So these questions are from John Richardson. The first one is, are you factoring in the anticipated, quote, student enrollment cliff that senior IU officials anticipate within the next 3 to 4 years?
Sure, great question. Yes, I think so. So what we've kind of tried to mention before is that this particular edition, so the MS district, clearly that is a proposal targeted at student housing. It's in the name, and it's immediately adjacent to campus, and the purpose is for purposeful zoning for that use. This Plex use really is for a wider swath of the community, we hope. So the effect of the cliff, by including the effect of the cliff, would only be, if Plexes were approved, would be that the relationship between them would be that there would be less students in the historic neighborhoods, right? That's what some people think, that once we hit the cliff, we will have less students around. That may be. But we have a lot of other people in town besides students. We have growing, economic sectors. Catalent's growing. We're trying to grow our other sectors downtown, attracting business to Bloomington. And one way to do that is to have good quality available housing. And I think if we increase the number of units available across town, across the whole of the city, then that would be a positive for those other goals, unrelated to whether or not students would be occupying those units. And then if the cliff doesn't happen, which, I mean, I have no reason to think it's not going to, I'm just saying if it doesn't, then yes, there will still be students in these communities, in these neighborhoods, and more units can allow for more units for other demographics than just students.
And two follow-up questions. What's the incentive for developers or landlords to build and operate affordable housing? And is there any way that we can assure that the city's rental inspection department is fully staffed and aggressively enforcing the local laws and regulations?
Sure, great questions, thank you. So the first question, some things happen outside of our department. So the Housing and Neighborhood Development Department and Economic and Sustainable Development Department work with developers to, outside of our regulations, to encourage inclusion of affordable and workforce housing. And inside of the UDO, in our regulatory world, we have some development incentives for the inclusion of those types of housing as well. So that can range from, I believe, your typical kind of reduced setback standards to additional units if you were building a larger development. And I'm sorry, Keegan, what was the last one?
The second question was regarding city's rental inspection department, and can we assure that they'll be fully staffed and aggressively enforcing local laws and regulations?
Sure, great. So yes, so that's something obviously we need to work on. We need to work with them internally, and if there are needs that are increasing, if there are needs that are increasing for any reason, but especially because of a regulatory change like this, then that would be something, yes, so we would need to explore with department heads and the administration of what sort of resources are needed beyond what exists today. Yeah, we would be, that may need to be done. And that is obviously, of course, a little bit outside of our purview, but something that we have and will continue to discuss within the departments of what sort of effects or changes this could have on things that are regulated by other titles in the code. So for example, the rental title or city services, and how these will affect that. And so we are continuing to look at it. It's a fair question. We know that is a concern of people who feel that sometimes now that they worry that some of the existing rentals that they have in their areas of town are already suffer.
I have a kind of a piggyback question to that one. Yeah, there was a question about maybe a misunderstanding or a misspeak that said you last meeting you discussed that quote, we don't enforce codes, and then it goes on to say, has this changed? Because it didn't sound like once rezoning has changed, there's a lot you can do to keep zoning code violations from happening. So I think that was, probably a clarification that you might want to address that is similar.
Okay, I'm not sure, so tell me if I'm missing this, but I mean, we do enforce codes, so I don't know what the exact quote is.
That's probably in relation to covenants and restrictions.
Well, that's what I was going to say. We don't enforce covenants and restrictions, so that may have been something that was discussed. And actually, in our particular group, where the four of us work, the other half of our group, all they do is enforce code, our code only. So we do enforce Title 20. We don't enforce other titles, but I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure what that is related to, and I can go back and look and try to figure that out and clarify it on the website. But we do have enforcement, and we take it very seriously, and we escalate enforcement as needed for each violation as allowed by the UDO in order to achieve compliance. And that is on larger scale, when we have larger scale issues, but also on smaller scale with, we have done that on smaller rentals and issues in town as well, and do regularly. I will say, to clarify, Patrick had a question earlier. If a lot is too small to build on under current codes, how is it possible to build bigger plexes in the smaller neighborhoods? So what I was trying to say was that the R3 that existed there before in some of these lots had some setback requirements that, because the lots are so small, made it difficult to do additions and further develop those lots. By changing the zoning district to R4, we've now changed the setback requirements. So more of the lot is available for development than would have been under the previous district. And kind of in the vein of what you're asking, and I think I said this earlier, but just to be more clear, yes, these lots may not support larger developments, larger plex developments. Some of them won't be big enough, or they may be able to support smaller scale sensitive plexes with, as I mentioned, like a duplex or a triplex with 3 1-beds, or they aren't going to be able to easily, everyone isn't going to easily support a 4-plex with multiple bedrooms in each. But that's okay. That's good. We want the option to be available for those lots and areas that can utilize the code, and not every lot has to. Just like not every lot right now could utilize the cottage development that's been in the code since April, but some can. And so we want it to be in there for that to be available. Okay, who else?
I have a question about how are we tracking ADUs that are being added to existing structures now that they are by right?
Yeah, so we track, though, we track them through the building permit. So even interior work on your home requires a building permit, unless, there are a couple of, I think, instances, or one instance where that may not be true, but in Bloomington, you have to get a building permit for pretty much everything you're doing on your building. So as I said before, we see all of those. And so one of the three current planners works with the property owner to make sure that they're meeting all of the ADU requirements listed in the code. And one of those requirements is to send notice to the neighbors currently. And then I believe one that is still going to be included, so you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, is the zoning commitment that is required to be recorded.
And there's an annual affidavit that they are required to give.
Right. That's, yeah, sorry, I was thinking affidavit. Yes. So annually, we will be checking in each year. And as they come through, we see them come through as a building permit. We add them to the list. We check in with them. We make sure through work with the auditor's office that they are in fact owner occupied. And then also ask them to separately confirm that. I just wanted to address this issue. Jenny says, this sounds, I'll just paraphrase, this sounds like it's for developers because, let's see, people who want to live in a historic neighborhood but can't afford to buy $400,000 homes can't, because all of the $180,000 to $300,000 homes have been taken by the developers. So yes, that is happening now. That's not going to stop happening. So if we don't change something. So what we're trying to do to change that is by adding the easier, more predictable developability of student housing, large scale and small scale in the multifamily student housing district, as well as the plexes. And so the way that could work is at some point is that when houses turn over to plexes, and especially if we are going to hit a cliff, there's a finite number of students in town who want to live off campus, away from the stadium and those things. So if the concern is that developers are taking them for student housing, if we can add more units, it's the lots that we need to create more lots that are available for families. So if we have 2 lots, for example, that are currently both being rented, and then one turns into a duplex and those both sides get rented, and it creates an opportunity for that second original lot to be owned. And that we would see, hope to see on a wider scale, that the small inclusion of plexes across town would open up the availability of being able to pick up those homes for first-time home buyers. But yes, we completely understand that there's a concern that what's going to happen is that both lots are going to be picked up, and both lots are going to turn into rentals. And now there are going to be 4 units on these lots instead of 2. And we understand that, and that's why we're trying to create regulations that that make that less likely, and also to track moving forward, so that if it appears to be going that way, that we can change it.
So Jackie, I just want to, clarify one thing. These are not necessarily regulations for developers. Anybody can take advantage of this, whether it's a person who owns a lot and wants to add a duplex onto the back side of it, or a triplex. We're not trying to necessarily benefit developers. We're trying to get housing units within the community. So it's not just something that's aimed for developers, but anybody can take advantage of this. And the goal is to get housing units. That's the overall goal. Yes,
thank you. You're right. Sometimes I say the thing that I think is already, I don't say the thing that I think is implicit, but they're not written for developers. We are trying to find a way to help increase owner occupancy and help increase the number of units. And this is just one of a handful of ways that we think could work together to do that. And that's why we'd like to include that. Keegan, did you have something?
Yeah, I have a question from Barry Clapper. This question is, have you looked at how the cost of sprinklering, which is required for tri and quadplexes, would likely impact the cost of development, potentially resulting in lower quality construction, higher rents, or an incentive to buy up adjacent lots to spread out the cost?
Well, I mean, I guess looked at in that we know that was raised last time, right? And we know just from our dealings with this is what we do, is work in the community on building issues, is that we know that sprinkling could be required. We would point out, I think the message gets I think maybe I'm being a little unclear. We don't necessarily think that all of the new units that could be built under Plexes would be affordable. We think the addition of units to the overall unit count could have an effect of bringing down unit cost across the board or in a neighborhood. So yes, those might be more expensive. As you know, and others probably do too, I believe a number, if not all, of the homes on the South Dunn Street PUD are sprinkled because of their proximity to one another, even though they're single family. And I mean, they are not affordable, but they are not wildly more expensive than homes in our historic neighborhoods either. So it's definitely doable. Yes, there's definitely a cost factor included. And I think the focus is, my main response is that no, we do not think that every unit to be built will necessarily be affordable. We're looking to kind of put a dent or have an effect on the total number of units available in town with a lot of our processes, but with this one as well. Do we have a couple more before, Brian, you have something?
I have two that I think could be pretty quick.
Okay.
So one is, do duplexes lose their 6 unrelated occupancy limit if they were reverted back into a house?
Yes. So that is something we've heard over the years. So I've worked here for 5 years. I've been manager of this division for 2, maybe. In the 2 years that I've been involved in enforcement, we definitely we work closely with hand and have we make people put them back. So or they lose their occupancy. So, that is an enforcement issue that we deal with. And yes, it's per unit. So if you decide to take your duplex and turn it into one unit because, 6 friends said they wanted to live together, that was a mistake, because now you've lost your ability to have 6 there unless you can turn it back into a duplex. So once something goes back to single family design, then it has to meet single family requirements, including 1 kitchen and maximum of 3 unrelated adults in the historic neighborhood.
Okay, and then another one. Why not make Plexes owner occupied required?
Oh, great question. We looked into that last time, and it's not allowed. It's illegal. That would be an easy answer, I think, to kind of get to address what the majority of people would prefer that Plexes be. We aren't allowed, and we do sometimes, I think, lose focus also that it's okay to have rentals. They're not all terrible neighbors. So maybe that's probably part of why it's not allowed to do that. But it's not even something we can explore. It's illegal to say that they have to be. There's a special stipulation, and I don't know what it is offhand, I apologize, that allows us to include that requirement for ADUs. Keegan or Ryan, do you have one more? It's 7, but we could do one more probably. Nobody's unmuting. Okay. We just want to say thank you so much for everyone spending your time here with us. We will have another very similar meeting to this on Monday. So the presentation will be similar, but of course we never know what the questions are going to be. And we appreciate all of your feedback, and we'd welcome you back that day as well. We will discuss other text amendments that will come forward on Tuesday evening, both meetings at 5:30. And the presentation will go up on the website. And then sometime next week, we will post a final feedback form for any more general comments and then comments on these proposals as well. Please do, here in the next couple minutes, I'll leave it open, submit any questions that you have so that they can be recorded in the chat, and we can get to those for the website. And again, thank you all so much. We know that this is a long, arduous process. We are appreciate your input, and really are looking forward to hopefully being able to find a positive way to include this in the community. Okay, thank you guys. Have a good night.